I've been a bit of a recluse all my life. My name is Lauren, and I've always had a flair for keeping myself occupied. Please understand that I'm not antisocial in any way. All I really want most of the time is to be alone. Thank heavens, my mother saw my independence from a young age. Rather than attempting to alter me, she directed it towards something constructive. When I was hardly tall enough to reach the kitchen counter, she introduced me to the world of cooking. Like a sponge, I absorbed everything. Mom taught me how to comprehend food, not just how to cook. We would visit cafes and restaurants throughout the city, and she would explain each dish to me. My passion with eating only grew stronger as I got older. I became aware that food was about presentation, ambiance, and more when I began reading articles by well-known restaurant critics. Food was about more than just flavor and texture. "I want to write about food," I said to my mother one day. She gave me a proud little expression as she glanced at me. "So you better study everything you can about it, kiddo." And I did precisely that. With the intention of mastering the culinary arts, I enrolled in a culinary institute. After receiving my degree, I continued on. I improved my writing skills by taking journalism courses. With my words, I hope to create visuals and evoke a sense of taste in my readers. I worked as a food reviewer for a small local paper for my first job. I wrote about this little Italian restaurant, telling you how the homemade pasta melted in my tongue and how the heady smell of basil and garlic took me right to a Tuscan kitchen. I was surprised that it was well liked. The next day I got a call from my editor. "You have a gift, kid," he remarked. "If you keep doing this, you'll succeed." And that's when I realized what my calling was. I went from newspaper to magazine, gaining notoriety for my funny and honest evaluations. But when I launched my own social media accounts, that's when things really changed. All of a sudden, I was communicating with foodies worldwide directly instead of merely writing for magazines. My fan base expanded as they eagerly followed my updates on the newest culinary fads and lesser-known eateries. It was really an ordinary Tuesday night. I was reviewing at the Rustic Spoon, a new farm-to-table restaurant, and had taken a seat at a comfortable corner table. I was taking notes about the atmosphere when I noticed an older couple at the adjacent table. Whispering to her spouse, the woman was staring at me closely. I smiled politely, accustomed to being acknowledged, and returned my attention to my notes. "Pardon me." The woman had a pleasant, excited tone to her voice. "Are you not Lauren Miller, the culinary expert?" I gave a nod. "That's who I am. It's good to meet you." "Oh, I'm so excited," she exclaimed. "All of your posts are followed. Do you want to have dinner with us?" I wavered. When I'm working, I usually like to eat by myself, but the couple's sincere eagerness convinced me to change my mind. The woman identified herself as Martha, her husband as George, and she added, pointing to a young man I hadn't noticed before, "This is our son, Jack." Jack raised his head from his phone and met my eyes. "Hi," he said, his face breaking into an asymmetrical smile. "It's good to meet you." We had a smooth talk. George and Martha were quite interested in hearing about my recent adventures, and Jack added some clever remarks that made me laugh, even though I wasn't laughing. I discovered that I was enjoying their company more than I had anticipated as the evening went on. Talking to Jack in particular was a breeze. We found that we both like bad puns and indie films. Jack hesitated to go when it was time. "Hey, is it cool if I asked for your phone number? You know, in case I need suggestions for a restaurant or anything else." Unrelated to the meal I had just eaten, I had a flutter in my tummy. Yes, I heard myself reply. For suggestions on restaurants. It was the night that we first texted. We were discussing food and places at first, but soon we were talking about everything and everything. Our conversations turned into the best part of my day. Jack asked me out on a formal date a month later. Without hesitation, I answered sure. We went to a quaint small cafe that I had been hoping to explore for our first date. I became aware of how at ease we were with each other as we were seated across from one another. The uneasiness I'd grown accustomed to on first dates wasn't there. We met, and Jack got engaged a year later. He was aware that I didn't like big, ostentatious events, so it wasn't one. Rather, he asked me to marry him over dessert after making a heroic effort to cook me dinner, which consisted of lumpy mashed potatoes and a little burnt steak. I mean, how could I refuse that? We relocated to my apartment. We made the sensible decision to create a joint account for shared costs after the wedding. Given my greater income, I gave more, but we both thought it was appropriate. Jack showed new sides while they lived together. He was prone to leaving his clothing hanging and dishes in the sink. His toothpaste tube was always open, and there were coffee cups around. I forced myself to bite my tongue and admit that I was human too. It's just an adjustment period, I told myself. We'll find our rhythm. And slowly we did. Jack made an effort to tidy up more, and I learned to relax my standards a bit. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. 6 months later, it was time for our first vacation together. As we stood in the airport, luggage in tow, I felt a surge of excitement. I turned to Jack, ready to share my joy, when I noticed his gaze fixed on something behind me. I spun around to see Martha and George approaching us, beaming widely. They carried only small carry-on bags, looking as if they were embarking on a day trip rather than a week-long vacation. Surprise! Martha exclaimed, pulling Jack into a hug. We couldn't let you two lovebirds have all the fun, could we? I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't part of the plan. I looked at Jack, hoping for some explanation, but he avoided my gaze. It's a kind of family tradition, he mumbled. We always vacation together. I forced a smile, trying to mask my disappointment and frustration. How nice, I managed to say. But don't you need more luggage for a week-long trip? George waved his hand dismissively. Oh, we'll just pick up what we need there. No point in lugging around heavy suitcases, right? The first few days of our vacation were a whirlwind. I focused on the positives, the beautiful scenery, the interesting flavor combinations I discovered, and the warm hospitality of the locals. But as the days wore on, I couldn't help but notice how freely Martha and George spent money. They shopped like there was no tomorrow, ate at the fanciest places, and never seemed to worry about the bill. One evening, as we sat in yet another overpriced restaurant, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. I leaned towards Jack and whispered, "How can your parents afford all this?" "They're retired, right?" Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They're good with money," he mumbled, suddenly very interested in the menu. I wanted to press further, but Martha chose that moment to launch into a story about her bridge club, effectively ending our private conversation. As our vacation drew to a close, I found myself looking forward to returning home. The day after we returned, I decided to check our joint account, curious to see how much we'd spent. As I logged in, my eyes widened in shock. The balance was much lower than I'd expected, alarmingly so. "Jack, can you come here for a minute?" I called out, my voice tight. I turned the screen toward him. Care to explain this? Jack's face paled as he looked at the numbers. I might have used our account to cover some of Mom and Dad's expenses, he admitted quietly. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger bubbling up inside me. "Jack, that was our money. Money that I mostly contributed. You should have discussed this with me first." I know, he said, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry, Ronnie. It won't happen again." "I promise." A month passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Jack kept his word and didn't touch our joint account without discussing it with me first. I tried to put the vacation incident behind us, focusing instead on my work and our life together. One crisp autumn evening, Jack came home with a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Hey, Ronnie," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind, as I stood at the kitchen counter prepping vegetables for dinner. "I've got an idea. How about we go on an overnight picnic this weekend? Just the two of us, a rented motorhome, and the great outdoors. What do you say?" The idea was appealing. We spent the next few days preparing for our mini-adventure. I packed a cooler full of gourmet sandwiches, homemade potato salad, and a bottle of wine. Jack handled the logistics, renting a compact motorhome and mapping out our route. We arrived at the campsite by mid-afternoon. The area was beautiful, surrounded by towering pines and a crystal-clear lake. Jack maneuvered the motorhome into our assigned spot, and we stepped out to enjoy the fresh air. That's when I saw it, a familiar car pulling into the spot next to ours. Martha and George emerged from the car, waving enthusiastically. "Surprise," Martha called out. "We thought we'd join you for your little getaway." I turned to Jack, hoping to see shock on his face that matched my own. Instead, he looked sheepish, avoiding my gaze. "Jack," I said, my voice low and controlled, "did you tell them about our trip before?" Before Jack could respond, Martha bustled over, pulling me into a tight hug. "Oh, isn't this exciting? A family camping trip." I forced a smile, noticing that once again, they had arrived without any supplies. No tent, no food, not even a change of clothes. As the evening wore on, it became clear that our romantic getaway had turned into a family ordeal. Martha and George dominated the conversation, regaling us with stories of their past camping adventures. They helped themselves to our food and wine, leaving little for Jack and me. When it came time to sleep, another problem arose. Our compact motorhome wasn't designed for 4 adults, and Jack turned to his mother. "You and Dad take the bedroom. Ronnie and I will manage in the car." So instead of enjoying a cozy night in our rented motorhome, I found myself uncomfortably curled up in the back seat of our car, with Jack snoring softly in the front. The next morning, bleary-eyed and stiff from our awkward sleeping arrangements, I suggested to Jack that we cut our trip short. The drive home was tense, filled with awkward small talk and long stretches of silence. As soon as we arrived back at our apartment, Jack's parents bid us a cheerful goodbye, seemingly oblivious to the strain their presence had caused. Once they were gone, I turned to Jack. "We need to talk about this," I said firmly. He nodded, looking resigned. "I know. I'm sorry, Ronnie. I should have told you they were coming." "It's not just about that," I sighed. "It's about boundaries. Jack, your parents can't keep barging into our lives like this. We need to set some ground rules." Jack nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll talk to them." A couple of days after our return, I was in the kitchen testing a new recipe when the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Martha and George were standing there, bright smiles on their faces, as if the vacation fiasco had never happened. "Lauren, dear," Martha exclaimed, giving me a quick hug as they bustled in, "we need your expertise. We were wondering if you could tell us which restaurants in the city have the most delicious dishes." "Well," I said, caught off guard by the question, "there are quite a few excellent places. The French Bistro downtown, Latte Canard, is fantastic, and Sepkura Sushi on Fifth Avenue has some of the best sushi I've ever tasted." "Why do you ask?" Martha's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Oh, we thought we'd keep an eye out for any open events at these restaurants, so we can go and eat for free." I turned to Jack, who had just walked into the room, hoping he'd back me up. But he just shrugged and said, "Come on, Ronnie, you've got to accept my parents as they are. No use trying to change them." I was speechless. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? But before I could formulate a response, Martha and George had thanked me profusely and left, chattering excitedly about their plans to score free meals. A few days later, I was preparing for a review of a new upscale Italian restaurant, Bennett. As usual, I posted the details of my visit on my social media page, letting my followers know when and where they could expect my next review. The evening of the review arrived, and I settled into my table at Bennett, notebook in hand, ready to experience and evaluate the menu. I had just opened the wine list when I heard a familiar voice. "Well, hello there." I looked up to see Martha and George beaming at me as they sat down at my table without invitation. My heart sank. Martha picked up a menu and announced loudly, "I'm Lauren's mother-in-law. You know we're here to enjoy the free meal with her." I felt my face grow hot with embarrassment. "Martha," I hissed, "please lower your voice. I'm here to work. You can't just show up like this." But Martha wasn't listening. She raised her voice even more. "Oh, don't be silly, dear. Everyone knows you food critics eat for free. Why shouldn't your family enjoy the perks too? We have every right to be here." I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on us. The head waiter was approaching our table, a concerned look on his face. This was quickly spiraling out of control. "Martha, George," I said, my voice low but firm, "I'm giving you one last warning. If you don't leave right now, I will have no choice but to call security. You are interfering with my work and causing a scene." Martha's face contorted with indignation. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Well, I never," she exclaimed. "Is this how you treat family, Lauren?" As she gathered her purse, she turned to me one last time, her voice dripping with disappointment. "You know, I'm beginning to think I made a terrible mistake. I'm the one who told Jack to marry you. I followed your Facebook page and I thought, now there's a girl who could help us enjoy the finer things in life. I thought you'd help us eat at fancy restaurants for free, maybe even support us a little. But clearly I was wrong. If this is how you treat family, well, we're no longer interested in being part of yours." With that parting shot, Martha stormed out of the restaurant, George trailing behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. My hand shaking, I reached for my phone and dialed Jack's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Jack," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "is it true? Did your mother really push you to marry me because she thought I'd provide for them?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Jack sighed. "Yes," he admitted. "Mom saw your success and thought, well, you know how she is. She insisted you'd be perfect for me, for us." I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. I hung up and turned to the head waiter, who had been hovering nearby. "I'm so sorry for the disturbance," I said. "I won't be able to complete my review tonight. Please extend my apologies to the chef." As I gathered my things, I pulled out my phone once more and quickly typed out an apology to my followers, explaining that due to unforeseen circumstances, my review of Bennett would be postponed. The drive home was a blur, my mind reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. When I walked through our apartment door, Jack was waiting for me, his face etched with worry. "Ronnie," he started, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "All this time, was I just a meal ticket to your family?" Jack's face crumpled. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. "No, Ronnie, no. I mean, yes, that's how it started with my mom's idea, but I fell in love with you. The real you, not your job or your connections, just you." I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. He sat next to me, his eyes pleading. I know I've made mistakes. I should have set boundaries with my parents long ago. But Ronnie, I love you. I want to make this work. Can we try to fix this? I looked at him, really looked at him. Despite everything, I knew I loved him too. As we sat there on the couch, hands intertwined, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could salvage this mess and come out stronger on the other side. The next couple of months passed in relative peace. Jack made efforts to set boundaries with his parents, and I threw myself into my work, trying to rebuild the trust in our relationship. Then came the moment I'd been working toward for years. My cookbook was published. It was more successful than I could have ever imagined. Major newspapers and magazines praised it, and it quickly became a bestseller on all the major online retail sites. One evening, as I was scrolling through yet another glowing review, Jack came home with a surprise. "Let's celebrate your success," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I've planned a trip to that charming city you've always wanted to visit. It's got everything you love. Amazing restaurants, historical sites, beautiful nature, and I booked us into that boutique hotel you've been eyeing." I hesitated for a moment, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. "It's just us, right? Your parents aren't coming." Jack looked me in the eye. "I promise, Ronnie, it's just us. No parents, no surprises." The day of our trip arrived, and we made our way to the train station, luggage in tow. As we approached the platform, I felt my heart sink. There, waving enthusiastically, were Martha and George. I turned to Jack, hoping against hope that this was some cruel coincidence, but the guilty look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "I'm sorry," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I couldn't not invite them. Mom found out about the trip. At that moment, something inside me broke. All the promises, all the efforts of the past months, they meant nothing. But I plastered on a smile as Martha and George approached. I noticed they only had a small purse between them, no luggage. I asked, already knowing the answer, "Where's your luggage?" Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about that, dear. You'll take care of everything, won't you? After all, we're celebrating your success." As the announcement for boarding came over the loudspeaker, we made our way onto the train. As everyone settled into their seats, I stood up. "I'm just going to use the restroom before we depart," I said, grabbing my purse that contained my phone and documents. I stepped off the train, the cool air of the platform hitting my face. I stood there, watching as the train's doors closed, as the whistle blew, as it slowly began to pull away from the station. My phone buzzed in my purse, startling me out of my reverie. Jack's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Ronnie, where are you?" Jack's panicked voice came through. "We're no longer on the same path," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm divorcing you." I hung up without waiting for his answer. My hand shook slightly as I opened my banking app and blocked Jack's access to our joint account. It was hardly a minute later when my phone called once more. It was Martha this time. As she swore and threatened, demanding that I cover their travel expenses and make up for any mental pain they had suffered, I put the phone away from my ear. I talked quietly when she finally stopped to get her breath. "Martha, I don't fear your remarks or your threats. I will not think twice about pursuing legal action if you post any defamatory remarks." For good measure, I blocked her number first, then Jack's, and lastly George's. I took a deep breath, got in the taxi, and went home. The emotions and realities of the weekend flew by. I prepared divorce papers, called a lawyer, and packed up Jack's stuff. By Monday morning, I was worn out but determined. I became tight at the sound of a key in the lock. Jack entered, seeming desperate and unkempt. "Please, Ronnie," he said, extending his arms to embrace me. I took a step back and pointed to the bags at the door. "Your belongings are packed. Time for you to go now." His expression twisted. "You're not able to mean that. See, I've got the lesson now." On the journey, my mom and I got into a heated argument. I threatened to stop paying for them. Right now, I'm not even talking to them. Please give me another opportunity. Shaking my head, I gave him the divorce documents. "Jack, it's too late. It's not only about your parents here. It has to do with respect, trust, and the life I want to lead. I can't do this anymore, but it's all right that we have different goals." After a prolonged pause, he nodded while hunching over. With one last click of the door behind him, he gathered up his suitcases and left. The next few weeks were difficult but freeing. Jack seemed to have resigned, and my thorough paperwork made the divorce process go easily. I lost myself in my work, going to the kitchen and writing to find comfort. After everything had settled, I was once more alone myself, but not in the way I had anticipated. I found happiness again in the little things in life, like trying out new recipes, spending peaceful evenings with a good book, and interacting with my followers without the pressure of family expectations. I couldn't help but smile one evening while enjoying a bottle of wine on my balcony and taking in the view of the city. Though maybe not exactly how I had anticipated, life had worked out as it should have. Once more, I was Lauren, a culinary critic, writer, and above all, the mistress of my own fate.